As we get ready for this show this morning, we got some breaking news that has me wondering what in the hell they are trying to do in Miami, because we now know that that Jalen Ramsey and the Dolphins have mutually agreed to seek a trade partner. Now, I love the language on this, Frank, because anytime mutually agreed to seek a trade partner gets out in the news, what they're really saying is he's not going to be a Dolphin for very long. So, starting from that point, I think this is a clear note that the time for Jalen Ramsey and the Dolphins has come to an end.
Yeah, he's not coming back to the Dolphins unless they pull a 49ers and use other teams for leverage and then redo his deal. Like that could happen, but you're right. Probably Jalen Ramsey's gone here. And I think this is look, Jalen Ramsey's not washed yet. Like he's going to be 31 in October, but still played pretty well last season. If you trust Pro Football Focus's grades, he was a 10th graded cornerback in the entire league. He's still a good player. He might not be that elite, top one shutdown corner in the NFL, but he's very, very good. And some teams could use him. And if I'm one of those teams, look, I'm looking at who has the most cap space in the NFL. Was kind of surprised to see the Lions have the third most cap space in the NFL. If I'm a team like the Lions, I go to the Dolphins and say, I'll take this contract off your hands. I'll give you a 6th-round pick, late-round pick swap. I'm not giving you a good pick, but I'll take the contract off your hands. And I think the Dolphins could get out of it. I think they kept spending and spending and spending, and now the bill is due. And I think they find themselves stuck a little bit. And what can they do? They can get rid of some aging stars, basically. And it is a bad spot for Dolphins. We'll talk about them. But I do think this is a buying opportunity for other teams around the league. Who couldn't use a Jalen Ramsey? Who can't use a top 10 corner? Like this is for some of those contenders out there, Buccaneers come to mind of a team that, look, Rams, that would be funny. But teams that are just like, we need some cornerback help and we're pretty much set. This could be a big deal for them to land Jalen Ramsey.
I think it's interesting. Pro Football Focus grades every position and ranks them. And there are some limitations to this ranking because Pro Football Focus doesn't know their assignments, so it's more about the result in the process. That said, it's usually reflective of how these guys are playing, and they ranked Jalen Ramsey 16th of 222 corners last year. So, this is a guy who still, first of all, he played all 17 games, which I think is key when you get to the later part of your career is, are you staying healthy enough to play? And not all guys have, but he has been pretty healthy the last 5 years, and he had 2 interceptions, 11 pass deflections. I think what's interesting to me, like Frank said, is where are the Miami Dolphins in the life cycle of their team? Because this is a top 10 defense last year under coordinator Anthony Weaver that is trying to get rid of a guy, at least trade him. While I do believe it's more likely than not that Jalen Ramsey plays elsewhere, I'll also remind you, Myles Garrett wanted to trade and the Browns wanted to go into that. Trey Hendrickson, the Bengals are like, hey, you can go look into it. You want that? In fact, Baltimore Ravens told Lamar Jackson a couple of years ago that he was able to look into what teams are available. So I would say it's premature to say he's already gone, but we are definitely down that road and seem to like we're going to hit the destination.
Okay, so I have 2 tangents about this that number one.
Tangent away, Fitz.
Yeah, number one, how often do we see great players just bounce from team to team to team in the prime of their career? Like, it is weird to me, and it has to speak something. The NFL will keep any problem in any locker room if the production is worth it. So to me, to see a guy as good as Jalen Ramsey go from the Jags to the Rams to the Dolphins to possibly a 4th destination is some sort of a statement. I can't imagine great teams just let great players out the door all the time because we don't see that. And then it just makes me think about how different the conversation is every time we have it around quarterbacks, where we sit here and say, oh, well, if quarterback, wants to be great, they got to stay with one team. In the meantime, we're watching clearly one of the better players in his position for his generation bounce from team to team to team, and we have no problem with it. Like, it's so weird to me that Jalen Ramsey is doing this, that this is part of Jalen Ramsey's legacy, but it's also fairly stupid to me that we sit there in other positions and turn this into a reason to break somebody down. And with Jalen Ramsey, we don't do that. It doesn't make sense.
It reminds me a little bit of Darrelle Revis, but Darrelle Revis was more mercenary. Like, he was just, hey, I'm here. I'll help you win a Super Bowl like he did for the Pats in 2014. With Ramsey, he's being traded, like actively moving on from the guy. So that does raise some red flags, but he gets paid a lot, and he's aging for a cornerback. Like, 31 for a corner is pretty old. Yes, he's still playing pretty well, but you're right. Like, it is strange to see a great player bounce around as often as he has.
It's interesting because I don't think that Brandon Cooks and Jalen Ramsey have the same presence around a team that the other one does, but it does remind me a lot of receiver Brandon Cooks, who was with the Saints and he was with the Patriots, Rams, Texans, Cowboys. And what was interesting about him is that it's not that he played for all these teams, is that he played for 4 teams to which he was traded. So 5 different teams, and he kept getting traded. And the idea of these trades, which is what we've seen with Jalen Ramsey, is that you're too good to get cut, but you're not so indispensable that they're just going to pay you whatever you want. And when I did a story when Brandon Cooks got traded to the Cowboys, and I said, how did this happen? And I tried to talk to someone who had overlapped with him at each of the spots he went to. And in a lot of ways, this was not just one formula. It was, hey, well, the Saints didn't have the role he wanted, so he goes to the Patriots, who were in a window. But then the Patriots were going to pay him the next contract, and the Rams needed that. But the Rams kind of played him like a number 1 when he was really a number 2. So he ends up with the Texans, and the Texans had a lot of issues at the end of Bill O'Brien's term. And so it's interesting to me to consider, is Jalen Ramsey jumping around a Jalen Ramsey thing, a team thing? Is it one thing about Jalen Ramsey? And I know we're going to get to some of the transfer conversation today, but I think that there are a lot of interesting parallels here between guys moving around and what this precedent sets in the league. And also, hey, if a guy's already bounced around, are you more willing to let him bounce around? Also, how do we view this in light of, remember, Miami Dolphins receiver Tyreek Hill at the end of their regular season, which was the end of their season, said, I want out. Now, he ended up backtracking those comments, but what do we make of the fact that Tyreek thought he wanted out, Jalen does want out? And I'm not saying it's bad culture in Miami. I think guys really like Mike McDaniel and a lot of that, but is this a team that kind of feels like it's softly rebuilding, or every synonym that we can make for a rebuild? And what does that mean for Tua Tagovailoa? I mean, this is a team that just has not gotten over the hump.
I do have to ask what all this means for the Dolphins, because if we're being honest here, like you mentioned, Tyreek, does he want to be there? Does he not want to be there? He's going to get paid a lot of money this year for a 31-year-old wide receiver, and then there's an out after this year in the contract that's pretty easy. And if I want to really ruffle some feathers, I will remind the world that there's an out after not this year, but next year for Tua's contract if you're the Miami Dolphins. Like, is this the beginning of just a complete reset? Because if I'm the Dolphins organizationally, I guess the question is, what is my goal? If my goal is to be better than Buffalo, am I anywhere near that goal right now with the people that I have in the building? It doesn't feel like it. So just a couple of years ago, it felt like the Dolphins were on the precipice of becoming one of the teams in the AFC that could be a perennial contender. And now, Frank, I'm sitting here saying, my God, should the Dolphins just rip this whole thing up and start a rebuild?
Oh, it goes fast, doesn't it? I feel so bad for Dolphins fans. Warren Sharp, who does great work over there at sharpfootball.com, he posted on X, formerly Twitter, basically a chart of how long it's been since each team has won its last playoff game. And it's like, you know this, but it's stunning to see it like in black and white. The team with the longest drought in the NFL is the Miami Dolphins. 24 years since they last won a playoff game. And there's a big gap, like 22 years for the Raiders. I'm sorry, Fitz. 14 years for the Jets and Bears. Everybody else in the NFL's won a playoff game within the last 9 years. So you're talking 24 years for the Miami Dolphins. And now you're talking about just hitting the button, nuking it, starting all over again. It's so hard for the Dolphins.
We also have to remember Chris Grier is one of the longest tenured general managers in the league, the Miami Dolphins general manager. And
yeah,
so
that might change.
when you're having this reset, I mean, how does the Dolphins ownership routinely ranks one of the best ownership groups in the NFL. But I think we kind of like have to ask ourselves, what does this mean for the GM? What does this mean for the head coach? I know we've talked about, for example, teams like the Browns versus the Giants. The way that the Browns are soft resetting right now is because they have a little more runway than the Giants leadership does to be able to make some of these changes. And so that's what I want to know if I'm Mike McDaniel and Chris Grier. How much is ownership going to let us do before they say, hey, why aren't you getting us to the playoffs? People like it around here, but why aren't we winning? Why did we have so many issues with defensive coordinator Vic Fangio 2 years ago? And then he goes to the Eagles, totally transforms guys, and they win the Super Bowl. And again, Anthony Weaver's a great DC down in Miami, so I'm not saying they don't have another one, but I think there are some questions that Miami will have to ask itself if guys want out, if guys don't get along with coaches. Is it maybe too player-friendly an organization? These are things that they should at least be asking.
Yeah, and that's one thing. I mean, you said before, Jori, like, you wouldn't say it's a bad culture in Miami. I'll say it's a bad culture in Miami because a lot of the things coming out after the season were guys were just kind of running all over Mike McDaniel. I think he's a good coach. I really do. But leadership is also part of that. When guys aren't showing up to meetings and now you're looking at, okay, we got to get rid of Jalen Ramsey. Well, why? They got rid of Vic Fangio. Well, why? Vic Fangio goes on to his next team, wins a Super Bowl. Like, Vic Fangio is one of the greatest defensive coordinators of all time, and the Dolphins players couldn't get with that program. Like, it's just a weird vibe around there. And I think what's happening with the Dolphins, honestly, is kind of a warning to all the rest of the NFL teams and fan bases too. When you're close, like when you make the playoffs, like a team like Denver or a team like whoever, who's just kind of right on the cusp, you think, of doing something special. The Dolphins were. I mean, they made the playoffs. They looked pretty good. The Tua stuff with the health was always a worry, but you felt like, okay, now we can go compete with the Bills. Now we're going to start buying everything up. We're going to go get Tyreek Hill. We're going to go get Jalen Ramsey. What do we all do? We said, yay, go Dolphins. They're going for it. Here's what happens. If you take a shot and you miss, you look at yourself in a couple of years, you say, okay, we got all these bloated contracts. What do? We got these aging stars, and we might have to just give away Jalen Ramsey to get out of this contract. We might have to give away Tyreek Hill because that ain't working anymore, and he might be on the back nine of his career. He might be on the 18th hole of his career for all we know after how he played last year. So I just think it's we always celebrate like going for it, and I do too. I just talked about that with Lions about getting Jalen Ramsey, but you have to do it in a way that you don't look up in 3 years and say, we got nothing out of this. The Jets got nothing out of that whole Aaron Rodgers experiment. The Dolphins got nothing out of going for it, quote unquote, when they were so close, when they made the playoffs. They didn't even get a playoff win out of it, and they're still stuck on 24 years. So beware when you, quote unquote, go for it, because sometimes it doesn't end up as you want.
Totally, Frank. And I also think that we have the situation where, hey, Jalen Ramsey was one of multiple pieces that the Rams went for. They went for it. They got a lot of guys, the whole F them picks from Les Snead, and they did win the Super Bowl. But that's not what's going to happen. Sometimes. That is the outlier. That is the exception, not the rule. But I'll ask you guys, now that it seems like Jalen Ramsey could be on the way out, or there's at least a possibility for him to be on the way out, do you think it is more or less likely that Tyreek Hill plays for the Dolphins, let's say 1 in 2025 and 2 in 2026?
I think the Dolphins have to be conflicted here. I really do, because look, Tyreek Hill is lived off of being the fastest guy in the field. Like, he's made a Hall of Fame case being the fastest guy in the field. Well, he's in his 30s now. And last year, his yards per game got cut in half. He played all 17 games, got more than 120 targets, and still didn't reach 1,000 yards. I get it. He had a wrist injury, and that was kind of what was trotted out as the excuse. He did not look like the same guy. Now, might he rebound in 2025 and almost go for 2,000 yards again? I guess that's on the table for him still.
Oh, don't hedge it, Frank. Don't hedge it. Go for it one way or the other. Is Tyreek in? Is Tyreek out? What do we do?
He might just...
You tell him, Fitz.
This might just be Tyreek Hill. And if I'm the Dolphins, I'm like, can we have an exit ramp here? Like, he wanted out. Like, but they have to be conflicted, because all of a sudden, if you trade Jalen Ramsey, you trade Tyreek Hill, you're just saying you're rebuilding, right? Like, you can't trade those two guys for nothing, and they're not going to get anything in return for those guys. It's just contract dumps. You can't dump those guys and then say, yes, we still want to go to the playoffs. Like, it just doesn't fit. Like, so I don't know. I don't know what they do with Tyreek Hill. If they wanted to trade him, I think they would have traded him already. But I just think that they're in that rough spot where you don't want to admit, we got to blow this thing up and start all over.
I mean, I think they're trying to get another year of Tyreek, right? Like but I guess if I'm an organization, I'm asking myself, can I trust that? I mean, he was so loud at the end of the year about not wanting to be around.
The squeeze. The juice ain't worth the squeeze. Hey, if you're getting 947 yards or whatever, that ain't worth the problem anymore. If you're a Super Bowl caliber football team and you want to add a dynamic weapon and you want to take a chance on Tyreek Hill, that makes a lot of sense. If you are trying to build something that can sustainably compete with the Buffalo Bills for the next 5 years, Tyreek Hill isn't part of that plan anymore. So, well, I think he'll play another year, because if they would have moved him, if they were going to move him, they already would have moved him. But I don't think he has any long-term hope there. And then I'll double down on one other thing. Frank, go back to that list of franchises haven't won a playoff game, and give me that list again. The Dolphins are number one in 24 years for the Dolphins, 22 years for the Raiders, 14 years for the Jets and Bears. That's a big gap, by the way, between the two that are way up on that chart. Everybody else is within 9 years. So those 4 teams.
But think about this. The Raiders, the Bears, And who is the other one that's been a long time? The Raiders, the Bears, the Jets. What do those franchises have in common in general in the overall tone of the way they're spoken about? They all suck. And everybody knows they suck. And the world doesn't hold back on telling you how bad those franchises are. Like, you don't see people sit there and say, oh, man, the Raiders, the Jets, the Bears, more often than not, are on the cusp of greatness. Now, maybe Caleb can change it, all of these things. There's maybes. But in general, the tone around those teams for most of the last 20 years has been these franchises don't know what they're doing. At what point are we going to hold the Dolphins to the same standard? Like, the proof, if the proof is playoff wins, and, frankly, that is part of the legacy, whether we want it to be for every organization. If the conversation is in some way based on what you've done in the playoffs to show what your meaning as a franchise to the NFL is, then the Dolphins have been as meaningless as the Raiders, the Jets, and the Bears for 20 plus years. But we don't talk about them the same way. So
you know why, Fitz? I'm so glad you asked this, because I was having a conversation with someone last week in the league about where would Deshaun Watson go after the Browns if he continues his career. And I know this seems like a little bit... a little bit of a detour, but it's not. And they were talking about different teams that are like, well, maybe the Colts, maybe the Rams. And the reason they were saying the Rams, for example, just to be clear, I do not think is the case. But the reason this person in the league was saying that is because despite Los Angeles being a major market, the Rams and the Chargers can blend in that city because there are other sports teams and there's Hollywood and there's so much else going on. In the city of Miami, there's so much else going on that I'm not saying there's not rabid fans, and I'm not questioning the loyalty of Miami Dolphins fans. But if the city's not going well, they have a few more things that they're going to do and a little more ability to go outside than the Buffalo Bills fans or the New York Jets fans or even the Patriots fans in some ways, because it's just gorgeous there and they're at the beach. And in Los Angeles, there's so much else going on. And I think that legitimately plays into this. Now, the question is, how does that start factoring into, well, if the players are so happy there, whether or not they're winning? And I'm not questioning that they want to win, but I do think you have to ask these questions. And I say that also because I covered the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas for 7 years, and I saw that people get really comfortable there. And then you kind of have this conflict of there are players who are like, yes, it's good facilities, but I want to win. And others who are like, I've made it. I'm a Dallas Cowboy. And I'm like, oh, actually, because I think most people want to keep going and going and going. To me, what's interesting is you can question whether the Dolphins should be parting ways with Jalen Ramsey. You can question what they would do with Tyreek Hill. But all of this should also be viewed through the lens of we are less than a year since the Dolphins paid Tua Tagovailoa a really large contract. And you have to consider not only his health, but also if you're rebuilding, why did you pay him? Now, I will say, I just looked at Over the Cap. And Over the Cap does say that you basically have 2 more years of guaranteed money on this deal, about 54 million over the next 2 years, guaranteed 50 this year, 54 after. And then they can cut him fairly easily. And so I think it's really a 2-year window with Tua Tagovailoa, which if I'm asking this, I'm saying, well, do we want Jalen Ramsey for one of those 2 years? And then if we want to rebuild, do it after Tua's contract? To me, you want your rebuilding to all kind of come at the same time. I know that's not fun for fans, but you shouldn't be, a little rebuild here, a little rebuild there. Like, you're either in with Tua and believing that he can get you over the hump or you're not, right?
I like that little rebuild here, a little rebuild there. I'm going to use that. I'm totally stealing that, by the way.
Here,
also, as an aside,
rebuild there.
Yeah, right. As an aside, Deshaun Watson's never throwing another NFL pass. It's not going to happen. No team is going to take. There's not like.
Frank's like, I'm still on this.
No, why would any team? Why would any team sign Deshaun Watson to be its backup? You want to bring that circus to town? Nope.
I agree, but the point was, if you're going to bring the circus to town, it's got to be somewhere where there's a lot of other circuses.
The Saskatchewan Roughriders or something, maybe. Like they might want that circus, but no NFL team. Well, but anyway, I do think, like, you're right. Like, I just wonder what happens with Tua. This is another thing. Like, this isn't just a Dolphins issue. This is an NFL issue. Why pay a quarterback if you're not willing to see it all the way through? And all of us were kind of like, I guess you gotta pay Tua. I like Tua. I've supported Tua. I think I'm a defender of Tua. I think he's much better than anybody gives him credit for. But at the same time, you looked at that contract. You said, I don't know if this is really going to work out how they think about Brock Purdy and all these other quarterbacks in the kind of middle class of the NFL. And you say, do we want to end up like the Dolphins with Tua in a few years? But every team does. Every team just, here's your $50 million a year. We're going to pay you because that's what teams do.
Mike McDaniel is supposed to be one of the most likable coaches that players want to play for in a city that's one of the best to play in the NFL if you just want to be a young millionaire and live out your party life in a state that has no state income tax. Like when you start looking at all of the variables that should
Miami
be
Dolphins
pro Miami,
sign Fitz.
the Dolphins should be a contender every single year because
like
everything supposedly
yeah.
that they have in place is supposed to make them a more desirable location for free agents, for people to want to be like the Dolphins should be great, and they aren't. And there's a real question because I think Jori right now, if I had to write in a time capsule to answer your question about Tyreek, I'll go a step further. If I had to put everything in a time capsule of where I think the Dolphins are in 3 years, I think in 3 years there's no Tua, there's no Mike McDaniel, there's no Tyreek, there's nothing that we currently see, and they're in massive rebuild, and they're going to look back at this entire chapter and say, well, we went for it and we missed a swing and a big old miss, and that at some point has accountability with the overall, not just from firing and hiring, but the overall tone and the way we talk about an organization. Like it's time to just accept that the Dolphins are every bit the same dumpster fire that the Jets are. And they're just not anymore.
Okay. No one's the dumpster fire that the Jets are. Do you know who ranked first in the NFLPA owners survey and last in the NFLPA
How
owners
did Stephen
survey?
Ross rank first? Like,
Because he got them a new facility and they get to live in Miami.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that there's not a little bit of padding here.
Stephen Ross,
and I'm not
who
saying that the Dolphins are about to win. Yeah. But I am saying the Dolphins and Jets are not the same dumpster fire, and I will stand by that.
But why? Okay, that's a good question. Okay, that's a good point. But then why have the Dolphins been without a playoff win for 24 years? Like, I think it all comes when something's that bad. I think it all has to come back to the owner. And again, Stephen Ross costing his team a draft pick by tampering Tom Brady, stuff like that. But if Stephen Ross is finishing first, which is laughable, in this NFLPA report, why? Like, what is it about the Dolphins that they've gone? Is it bad luck? Is it how would you account for the fact that the Dolphins have had the longest drought with a playoff win in the NFL? Like, it's got to be something.
Yeah, I do think that Miami, it's probably easy to get comfortable there. And so a lot of the question is, can you create a culture where guys are not comfortable and feel like making it to the Dolphins is the starting point rather than the pinnacle, and rather than, hey, we're already in this comfortable place and whatever happens after is bonus.
I will put this in total nerd terms for a second, Jori, okay? If two kids go in to take the SATs, all right, and one of them gets a higher score than the other, even though the other one might have put in all the work and doing all the things the right way, and the one here that got the higher score is a total bum that's not doing anything, that's the Jets. They have a playoff win since the Dolphins do. So the Jets have this higher score. Like, they have this thing that they can look around and say, hey, man, been a long time for us, but we're still better than you in the one thing that supposedly counts. Like, I hate the way we make wins and losses everything, but if we're going to make wins and losses and playoff stats everything for everybody, then, at this point, the Dolphins might not be the same dumpster fire that the Jets are, but their SAT scores are lower. So, like, that's it. At some point, that's what they're judged by.
For sure. But I think I view dumpster fire as something that is a term that encompasses beyond just record. But if it is a strictly record term, you have a point.
That's all you know what? I'll take small victories.